So yesterday I made a video talking about 5 NHL free agency signings that I think have the potential to turn out to be steals, and I think they're just really good value contracts. But in today's video I want to talk about 5 NHL free agency signings that I think teams might regret down the line. I'm not bashing on any of these players, I'm just not the biggest fan of some of these contracts. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Starting off the video with Matt Zuccarello from the Minnesota Wild, and I'm not saying Matt Zuccarello isn't worth $6 million because I think when he is healthy he's capable of being a 60-point guy across 82 games in a season. So I like the signing from that aspect, but 31 years old and 5 years, 2 or 3 years into this contract, I could start to see it, maybe being not so good for the Minnesota Wild. And another reason why I don't like it, it's not so much about Matt Zuccarello, it's more about the Minnesota Wild. What direction are they really going in? In my opinion, they should have started to turn over a new leaf and, start a little rebuild, or not even so much a rebuild, but like a retooling. But now they have $6 million locked up in a 31-year-old for the next 5 years, and how far is he going to push the needle? I don't really see Minnesota as being a playoff team next year because I think a lot of the teams below them are just continuing to get better. So that's another reason why I don't like this contract, just because I think Minnesota should be focusing on youth as opposed to going out there and trying to stay competitive with free agents like Matt Zuccarello. And even if this Minnesota team does make the playoffs next year, I can't really see them doing any damage when they get there. So that is like a big reason why I'm not the biggest fan of this contract. Like I said, 31-year-old centerman, he can play the wing as well, has played in 511 career games, has 114 goals and 241 assists for 355 points. This past season played in 48 games, the majority of them with the New York Rangers, had 12 goals and 28 assists for 40 points. So Matt Zuccarello can be a good leader and a good guy for a lot of the youth in Minnesota to learn from, but other than that, I'm not really quite sure what Minnesota was doing with this contract. I mean, maybe they could make some other moves to try to stay even more competitive over the summer, but we're gonna have to wait and see. But in my opinion, this was a risky contract and I'm not the biggest fan of it just yet. Next contract I want to talk about was signed by my favorite team, the Detroit Red Wings, and this contract was Patrick Namath on a 2-year, $3 million annual average. And I'm just not quite sure what they were thinking. I mean, he's 27, he's a reliable shutdown defenseman. I mean, he was a plus 27 in the 2017-18 season for the Colorado Avalanche, so obviously he's a very solid defender. But for $3 million, and when you have a lot of young defensemen trying to consistently crack the lineup, I'm just not quite sure, what the direction is for that blue line. Like I said, 27 years old, a 2-year, $3 million annual average deal, 250 games played, 4 goals, 35 assists for 39 points. Obviously not the prettiest numbers, but he isn't an offensive defenseman by any means. He's a guy who will most likely play on the bottom pairing through the majority of the season. This past season with the Avs, 74 games played, 1 goal and 9 assists for 10 points. So I mean, I guess it isn't too bad if he does, consistently play a role for the Red Wings and stays in the lineup over the next 2 years. But at that $3 million average, and with guys like Dennis Chalowski, Philip Hronek trying to consistently be defensemen in the NHL next season, and you still have Mike Green, Trevor Daley, Jonathan Ericsson, Danny DeKeyser, I'm just not quite sure, who's going to be bumped out, and I think Patrick Namath better play in the NHL for $3 million. I don't just want to have him down in the American League or scratched, because then, what is even the point of signing this deal? So I guess I trust Steve Yzerman, I trust all the moves that he's made, and I haven't even mentioned Moritz Seider, who could potentially make the NHL next season as well. So I'm just not quite sure. This is another one where I'm like, what direction are you going? Are you trying to, get more competitive, or just completely focus on the youth? So that's why I'm not the biggest fan of this contract, but obviously it's kind of early to tell, but I think this is a risky move, and if he doesn't play a consistent role in the NHL this year, I think that $3 million on the books next year can really be a pain. The next contract I want to talk about is Semyon Varlamov from the New York Islanders. He signed a 4-year, $5 million annual average deal, and in my opinion, New York should have done everything in their capability to keep Robin Lehner. He's 4 years younger than Semyon Varlamov, and you could argue right now that he is the better goaltender. Semyon Varlamov is capable of being a starter, but he wasn't great at all last year, and lost his starting job to Philip Grubauer, and ultimately in the end that is why Colorado decided to let him walk and not try to bring him back. So I'm just not quite sure, are the New York Islanders better after this free agency than they were last season? And my answer for that would be no. Even though they brought back Eberle, even though they brought back Anders Lee, I just really think that bringing back Robin Lehner should have been a main priority for them. Semyon Varlamov is a 31-year-old goaltender, like I said, a 4-year, $5 million annual average deal, has played in 448 career games, has 213 wins, 169 losses, and 50 ties or overtime losses, a 2.68 goals against, and a .916 save percentage. And like I said, this past season didn't have the greatest year by any means. 49 games played, 20 wins, 19 losses, and 9 overtime losses, a 2.87 goals against, and a .909 save percentage. So I think Semyon Varlamov is capable of, having a bounce back year and being a solid starting goaltender, especially when he has Thomas Greiss behind him, who last year was one of the best backup goaltenders in the entire NHL. But in my opinion, I'm just kind of baffled by this, and it's all just kind of weird that Semyon Varlamov, signed there for the $5 million average, and then, Robin Lehner turned down a $5 million deal from New York to sign a $5 million deal with Chicago. So it was all just pretty confusing, and we're going to have to wait and see how it plays out. But if I was a New York Islanders fan, I would be pretty worried about this contract, because you never know, he could even lose the starting job to Thomas Greiss next year, and then you're paying a backup goaltender $5 million for the next 4 years, who's 31 years old. So I'm not quite sure how it's going to play out. We're going to have to wait and see, but it definitely should be interesting. But I'm not so sold on this contract for New York, and I definitely would be a little bit worried. The next signing I want to talk about is Anton Stralman from the Florida Panthers. He's a 32-year-old defenseman, signed a 3-year, $5.5 million annual average contract with the Florida Panthers. And last year, Florida really struggled with keeping the puck out of their own net. And I think a guy like Anton Stralman can really bring some stability to that blue line and help them with that problem, especially now that they have Sergei Bobrovsky in the net. And overall, I'm a fan of the signings that Florida made this offseason, and I am a fan of them picking up Anton Stralman. I'm just not the biggest fan of the salary and the term. 3 years, $5.5 million for a guy who is 32 years old and struggled with injury a little bit last season, playing in just 47 games. So that's kind of my main worry for this deal, is if Anton Stralman can't stay healthy, then you have $5.5 million on the books for the next 3 years, which would most likely be a difficult contract to move. And eventually you're going to have to re-up some guys, sign restricted free agents and stuff like that. They did have a lot of cap space to give out this offseason, and they definitely did that. But, just because you have it doesn't mean, you have to go out there and spend it all, because eventually you are going to have to spend it somewhere on players that are already on your team. And that is how cap space just runs out, and eventually it sneaks up on you, and then you're cap strapped, like some teams like Vegas and Toronto and Winnipeg and teams like that. So Anton Stralman, I think, can be a good piece for them. When healthy, obviously he is a very consistent and reliable defenseman. He's played in 749 career games, 47 goals, and 195 assists for 242 points. This past season, in 47 games with the Tampa Bay Lightning, 2 goals, 15 assists for 72 points, so still put up some decent numbers in the games that he did play. But like I said, it was just a matter of him staying healthy. So I think if he can stay healthy, and then you have a blue line of guys like Keith Yandel, Matheson, Anton Stralman, and obviously Aaron Ekblad, and then backboned by Sergei Bobrovsky, and obviously having the really talented forward crop that they have, you have the makings of a team that is ready to make the leap into the playoffs. So if I were a fan of the Florida Panthers, I wouldn't be too worried about this contract, but there definitely is some risk involved. But I guess that is the stuff you have to do if you want to be a playoff team in the NHL, and I think Florida should be able to make that leap next season. Now, the last signing I will talk about in this video, and one I'm sure a lot of people knew was going to be in this video, and that is Brandon Tanev signing a 6-year, $3.5 million annual average deal with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I'm a big fan of Brandon Tanev. I think he's one of the best role players in the entire NHL in terms of a guy who just plays his bottom six role, kills penalties, and does everything really well. And I think he has some offensive upside too, depending on who he plays with. But giving a bottom six, kind of role player 6 years is definitely risky, and if it doesn't work out in the next 1 to 2 seasons, this would be a very difficult contract to move. Brandon Tanev is a 27-year-old left winger. Like I said, his new contract is 6 years, $3.5 million annually. He's played in 195 career games, has 24 goals and 27 assists for 51 points. This past season with the Winnipeg Jets, it was a career year for him. I believe he was like 3rd in the league in hits as well, so that's always nice to see. 80 games played, 14 goals and 15 assists for 29 points. So he's definitely going to bring some grit and some depth to this Pittsburgh Penguins team, who is going to look a lot different than they did last season, with the new acquisition of Alex Galchenyuk and stuff like that, and now Brandon Tanev. It's going to be interesting to see where all these guys play. Maybe they have a top 6 role for Brandon Tanev there. I'm not quite sure what their plan is, because it seems like they do with giving him such a big contract, but he can be a really good penalty killer for them and definitely be an important piece of the team. But I can understand why Pittsburgh Penguins fans are pretty upset, just with the term and the money, because usually usually you don't see bottom 6 guys get big contracts like this. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Brandon Tanev, but there definitely is a lot of risk involved here, and if it doesn't work out for the Pittsburgh Penguins in the next 1 to 2 seasons, this could be looked back at as a very, very bad signing. So that is going to wrap up today's video. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Make sure to let me know down in the comment section, what are some contracts that were signed that you think teams could look back at in the next 1 to 2 years and really regret it. And if you guys want to hear my thoughts on any of the other signings, because I know I didn't cover them all on the channel, just let me know down in the comment section below, and I will try to reply to all of those comments. And with that being said, I hope you guys all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content, and I will see you guys all in the next video.